Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's NFL Live. I screwed that one up. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Evolution Network this week, where we've got our football weekend review. This week, joining me is Chris Ransom. Wish a speedy recovery to our colleague Andrew Kermish, who's recovering from a nasty bug. And this week, we get some really interesting games for you guys. We're going to start here with probably the game of the week, the Thursday night game, San Francisco and LA Rams. Now,
this was a game I wanted to cover in depth on our podcast yesterday, but due to time constraints and due to us trying to get the NFL games we were covering the Ravens-Jaguars game yesterday. Due to time constraints, we couldn't really chunk everything in. We wanted to get our picks up for this week. But this is a game I really wanted to touch on because a lot of big plays happened in this game. Todd Gurley ran wild. Jared Goff played like the franchise quarterback that people are making him out to be. Now, granted, have a very good defense, and I think that really allowed the Rams to win a lot of these mismatches because you saw pick apart these guys. You saw Watkins get over 100 yards. You saw Robert Woods, who also had over 100 yards. Things throughout this game. Gurley ran wild, like I said. The Rams just clicked offensively. Their offensive line stepped up. Everybody on their offense came together and played good, decisive football. Actually had some strong drives near the end of the game. Hoyer got the ball back. They got the ball back on a fumble recovery. They got the ball back on an onside kick. And they kept having opportunity after opportunity to win this game, but nothing just ever came to be. So,
yeah, and the thing with San Francisco, too, they put up a heck of a fight. Brian Hoyer went 23 for 37 for 332 yards and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he put up a heck of a fight against the Rams. And I know you mentioned the Rams defense, but San Francisco offense came to play.
They did. The Rams have a good defense with Wade Phillips, but that offense came to play. And I picked the 49ers in an upset. I was the only writer at Draft Utopia to pick the Niners in the upset. And for a while, it looked like maybe it'll happen.
Nope.
It didn't happen, but for a while, it looked like maybe they'd come back and maybe this would be a game, but they were stopped on 4th down. Hoyer was sacked on 4th down to end the game.
Yeah, and that's really on the offensive line, but it really does go to, I think, more than anything, the coaching and preparation that's going on in San Francisco right now, because this team should not be able to score anything near what they scored this week. But they should not be able to play defense the way they've been playing. So I give all the credit in the world to their coaching staff. They've got these guys ready to go.
I think both Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay have done very well so far. Even though Shanahan is winless, week 1, they struggled. I'll admit that. Week 2, they played Seattle. They led them in the 4th quarter, but they couldn't maintain the lead. Week 3, they make a lot of adjustments offensively, and they come out guns blazing against the Rams. So even if they're 0-3, the effort they've made is much better than many teams in the league. I'd say they've shown the most effort of any 0-3 team in the NFL, even your Browns, because they were not supposed to be ahead of Seattle in the 4th quarter, and they were not supposed to get 39 points on a Wade Phillips defense that the Rams have.
Yeah, and I see a lot of similarities in this San Francisco team and the Browns. A lot of young players, coaching staffs that really have them playing extremely hard. They're extremely well prepared. They're making mistakes that young teams are supposed to make. They're paying for it the way young teams are supposed to be paying for it. But they're making plays and they're showing hope for the future, which quite frankly, in San Francisco, I didn't expect to happen. So, I mean, I see a lot of similarities between the two, even though they're being built in different ways.
Yes, these teams are being built in different ways. And the Rams had they had the 2 tight ends set with Higbee. They had Gerald Everett, Carrier. They used a lot of different tight ends, a lot of different combinations. One of the more notable injuries in this game was John Sullivan, the starting center. He left the game injured, but this defense stepped up. They stepped up early. They didn't step up late in the game. Nickel Roby, Coleman, a guy who I wasn't high on coming out of college, he made a huge interception on the first play of the game, but Hoyer was able to regroup. Marcus Joyner got injured in this game as well. So I'm really curious to see what's going to happen because I think Aaron Donald and Walker and Brockers, that defensive line is good. And then you've got Quinn Barwin, Ogletree, Mark Barron. They've got to play better. They've got to adjust. They played Dallas in week 4, and that's going to be a big game because Dallas, even if they win tonight, both of those teams would be 2-1. And I think it's possible. I had the Rams losing this game. I think the Rams can go 9-7, and 9-7 might be good enough to win this division if Seattle's offensive line woes continue. So we'll see. This is going to be really interesting to see what happens with these teams moving forward because the 49ers actually played a lot better than people realize. And one of the things I said with them heading into the year is they had a lot of depth on the offensive line, but they got even more depth with the trades they made. I know they got Yankee in last year's draft, and they got a bunch of other players, Garnett, different stuff, but they brought in Laken Tomlinson from Detroit and Brandon Fusco in from Minnesota. 2 huge acquisitions that make their guard play and depth at guard incredible. They've still got Staley. I think Brown at right tackle is probably the weak link, maybe Kilgore at center as well, but other than that, this is a very strong 49ers offensive line, and the pass rush can do things. We got to see more from Solomon Thomas, but Reuben Foster was injured. Malcolm Smith's been on IR since the start of the preseason, and Eric Reed was injured. So for the 49ers to go out there and score 39 points and only lose by 2 with those 3 guys injured and then Tart getting injured later in the game, that speaks volumes.
Yeah, it does. I mean, both of these teams, they're just great effort there. And that, for me, with teams like this, both of these teams, that really speaks volumes because a lot of young teams don't give that type of effort. They'll give it for 2 quarters. They'll give it for 3 quarters. These guys just keep going out for 4 quarters and going at it. So, I mean, the effort's there, preparation's there, and quite frankly, everything that we look for in teams is there. They just need the pieces to go with them. And I think both teams are doing a pretty good job at that.
I'd say the one rookie that stood out in this game for a rookie prospect reports is probably the 49ers' 5th-round pick, Trent Taylor, out of Louisiana Tech, a guy Thomas kept telling us about leading up to the draft. He had a touchdown in the 4th quarter that got the Niners back in this game, and that gave them momentum, confidence. They were able to recover a fumble off a muff punt return. They got an onside kick as well. So there were some things there that gave the Niners confidence, but their offensive line, their right tackle, couldn't protect the quarterback on 4th down. And the Rams are 2-1. The 49ers are 0-3, though, as they begin a 3-game road trip with Arizona, Indianapolis, and Washington. And I think the Niners are front runners now to secure Darnold with the other games, but we'll get to that later. We should get to our.
Well, I want you to think of it though, that with that offense, Robert Woods and Sammy Watkins both had 6 receptions for over 100 yards in that game for the Rams. So Watkins is paying off in a big way right now.
Yeah, I told my friend in fantasy who had Watkins in fantasy to start him, and I started Goff, but apparently that wasn't – I don't know if that was good enough. I haven't checked my roster. My opponent started Derek Carr last night, and Carr had an off game, so I don't know if Carr got enough points to beat me. They also had Chris Thompson, though, at running back for Washington, and he had a huge game at receiver. It's a PPR league, so they probably beat me, but Derek Carr didn't have a good game, and Goff had a better game, so we'll see. Yeah.
And now our next game today is probably one of the biggest upsets of one of the best teams in the NFL that I've ever seen. 44-7, Jacksonville beat the Baltimore Ravens. It was an absolute disaster. Joe Flacco got benched in the fourth quarter, I think it was, early fourth, maybe late third. On the bright side for Baltimore had Alex Collins. Alex Collins ended up with 9 rushes for 82 yards. So there was a bright spot there. But I think the talk of the game is Blake Bortles, 20 for 31, 244 yards, 4 touchdowns. The guy played like he did 2 years ago when he was setting those records and just had a absolutely wonderful game. Chris, what can you tell us about, what Bortles did and how the Jaguars ended up overcoming what had been such a dominating Ravens defense?
Well, with the Jaguars, we actually had this game covered on Talk Show yesterday, and we were calling things play-by-play. Blake Bortles looked like the 2015 Blake Bortles, as you said, Joey, but Joe Flacco looked like the 2016 Blake Bortles. And that's basically what this game was. It was 2016 Blake Bortles versus 2015 Blake Bortles. And 2015 Blake Bortles was playing for the Jaguars on Sunday. That's basically what this game was. And Bortles really stepped up, showed he can be the man. And this is going to be one of the things where one week Bortles is on the hot seat. The next week he's safe because he has games like this. This is going to be a recurring theme with the Jaguars throughout the year. But one of the things I was going to get to really quickly here is the Jaguars have a really good defensive coordinator. And I'm looking up what his name is because I remember when they brought this guy in, when Gus Bradley promoted this guy to defensive coordinator last year. He was a defensive line coach. I remember one of the first things he said is he wanted to rotate Fowler at outside linebacker and at defensive end. He wanted to put Ramsey at cornerback and safety. He wanted to put guys up at different positions to cause mismatches, try to throw them off. He wanted to put Puslesny at the Mike and the Sam, Jack at the Sam and the Mike. He wanted to put guys everywhere on the field so he could rotate them. He could confuse teams. And Jacksonville's defensive coordinator has done that. I even went out on a limb and said Jacksonville's defensive coordinator, who is a very good coordinator, he's Todd Wash. Todd Wash, he's the defensive coordinator for Jacksonville. I said that he should be in the running for a head coaching gig if the Jaguars make the playoffs, because he's a guy who wants to use Jackson and Campbell at both defensive end and defensive tackle. And with that kind of variety, it's a lot of good things about him. Wash, last year, he took a lot of control, bringing in Monty Kiffin to mentor him when he first took over as defensive coordinator. So he learned everything Monty Kiffin learned. And then this year, he brought in Clemson's defensive line coach, Marlon Bobby. So he brought in an older guy to mentor him, and now he's mentoring a college coach. So showing a lot of leadership traits. Todd Wash, the Jaguars defensive coordinator, he's showing a lot of leadership traits that you look for in a future head coach. So I think Wash deserves a lot of credit for what he did with that defense yesterday versus Baltimore.
Yeah, that's extremely impressive. And all those defensive linemen had an impressive day. Defensive coordinator Walsh, as you said, very impressive in how his preparation goes. I think he needs a couple more years as a coordinator just to get the experience under his belt. But as you said, I think he's got a very bright future ahead of himself. The next game on the docket
he won't get fired this year if the Jaguars don't make the playoffs. But if he keeps learning and preparing while the Jaguars become contenders, keeps his job, he's a future head coaching candidate.
Yeah. And next game on the docket is Denver Broncos versus the Buffalo Bills. The Broncos took the loss here, 26-16 to Buffalo. Now, Trevor Siemian had such a great game last week. This week, he went 24 for 40, 259 yards, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Jamal Charles had his best game as a Bronco with 9 attempts for 56 yards. Buffalo, on the other hand, Tyrod Taylor, exact opposite, 20-26, 213 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. Mike Tolbert, 11 for 41 yards and rushing. And Jordan Matthews, 3 receptions for 61 yards. So, Chris, give us a quick rundown of this thing.
Well, with Buffalo and Denver, Garrett Bowles and Cordy Glenn were both injured at left tackle. So the fact that Tyrod was able to rally his team without his star left tackle speaks volumes and shows me that he's the quarterback Buffalo needs to keep around. And if they don't keep him around, it's going to end up biting them in the rear end down the road, because he showed he can be the man without his star left tackle, without the best player on that offense in Cordy Glenn. Marcel Darius was also injured, and Tyrod still managed to rally this team, show incredible leadership, and show he's the guy. So Buffalo cannot even think about moving on from him after the offseason, but they might if they miss the playoffs. So it's going to be really interesting to follow Tyrod and see what he does throughout the year, because I don't think the Bills are going to take a quarterback in the draft, because Tyrod's playing well. Peterman's a great backup, a great career backup, like Mark has said, and we'll see what happens with this Bills team. But I think they know Tyrod's their guy now, and this was a statement game for him, showing he can be the man without a star left tackle in place. This was a huge step for him. Siemian, on the other hand, this was a meh game for him, but he might get Garrett Bowles back next week versus the Raiders. And if he doesn't, well, Khalil Mack's just going to have a field day with Denver, with Bowles out of the lineup. So this is a big win for the Buffalo Bills. They're 2-1. And if you type in who's in first place on Siri, if you ask Siri who's in first place, the Buffalo Bills are in first place in the AFC East once again, because it shows the AFC East division as the very first division on Siri when you ask what team is in first place. And as a Patriots fan, that disheartens me a little, but at the same time, let the Bills have their glory. They're probably not going to have it all season, so let the Bills fans be happy and have their glory right now.
Yeah, and we have New Orleans Saints defeating the Carolina Panthers in a game that I really didn't understand. Well, understood it, yeah, but didn't really understand what happened, because it was New Orleans Saints 34, Carolina Panthers 13, and I think what I didn't understand, Cam Newton, 17 of 26, 167 yards, no touchdowns, but 3 interceptions. I mean, Christian McCaffrey had his best game as a pro with 9 receptions, 101 yards, 4 carries, 16 yards, and then you had Drew Brees, who was the exact opposite, 22 for 29, 220 yards, 3 touchdowns. But what happened to Cam Newton there? Because he wasn't throwing anything downfield.
I for a while that without Greg Olsen, Cam Newton really doesn't have much of a passing game, and that showed. But the other thing is Kelvin Benjamin got injured in the first quarter of this game and did not return. So I think that's getting underlooked as well, because without Benjamin, without Greg Olsen, Cam Newton literally has no passing game to turn to, no passing game to depend on. So I think that really hurt them, and that forced them to adjust their offense and try to tailor gear the offense towards Christian McCaffrey, because Devin Funchess is not the number one guy. Curtis Samuel's not the number one guy. With those two out, they sort of had to tailor gear the offense towards McCaffrey and hope for the best.
Yeah, so that leads me to asking you.
I know Delvin Breaux and Lattimore were both out for the Saints as well, but still, that's sort of inexcusable when you consider.
Well, during the week, do they use McCaffrey more as a slot receiver to give Cam Newton another weapon? Because right now, as a receiver, McCaffrey's doing more as a receiver than he is as a rusher. He's only averaging 2.4 yards a carry.
I don't know. I think they're using him as a receiver and a running back.
Yeah, he's kind of in the Duke Johnson role at this point. But if things go the same way as they did with Duke Johnson in Cleveland, you could pretty much bet that McCaffrey may end up being a slot receiver before his time in Carolina is over.
And I'll give the Saints credit. They got a huge win. I thought both of these secondaries were suspect. That's why I had the Saints 42-38 in a high-scoring shootout. But Kelvin Benjamin being injured after it's a knee injury, so we don't know the severity or the extent yet, but they're saying he's doubtful for week 4 against the Patriots at this point. He hasn't been ruled out for that game yet, but the Panthers are basically saying, well, he has a knee injury. We're going to let him get 100%. They know they're probably not going to beat the Patriots in Gillette Stadium, so they're just going to let him rest and recover, which I think is the smart decision in this situation because you're 2-1. Even if you fall to 2-2, if you have Benjamin healthy, that's going to matter later in the year. So Greg Olsen, you're not going to have Greg Olsen or Kelvin Benjamin. So the Panthers are basically going to have to use Christian McCaffrey. Christian McCaffrey is going to have a Kareem Hunt game if the Panthers want to beat the Patriots. And we'll get to the Patriots game in a little bit here, but because Hightower was out for that. But the Panthers, they're basically going to have to rely on Christian McCaffrey for these next few weeks with Greg Olsen and Benjamin both being injured. That really cripples their offense to a point.
Yeah. And the next game is our next featured game is the Pittsburgh Steelers losing in overtime to the Chicago Bears. Now, this was just an inexcusable loss. When your opposing quarterback is 15 of 22, 101 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, you really have no excuse for losing that game. Now, on the same token, I'm looking, second-year running back Jordan Howard, a great feel-good moment here. 23 rushes, 138 yards, 2 touchdowns. So Jordan Howard had a career game at running back for the Bears. Then,
well, Pittsburgh's offensive line dealt with a few injuries. Marcus Gilbert was ruled inactive prior to the start of this game, so they didn't have their star right tackle, arguably their best lineman outside of Pouncey. This was Pouncey's first game at 100%, and while he did well, the rest of the offensive line crumbled because Ramon Foster got injured on the very first drive for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So they did not have their starting right tackle or their starting left guard. And while Villanueva stood during the anthem and he played a good game, the rest of the offensive line collapsed. Without Marcus Gilbert, that offensive line collapsed. And Chicago just was able to capitalize on that, even though their corners looked very suspect versus Antonio Brown. Even though Ben made smart decisions and avoided turnovers, the Bears were able to capitalize on that. What they didn't do is they didn't capitalize on Pittsburgh's mistakes because Pittsburgh had a fumble. They went for a field goal and they missed it. They also tried to return a field goal block for a touchdown. I was just being an imbecile. He fumbled at the 1-yard line. He had a Deshaun Jackson moment from his rookie season. So the Chicago Bears had chances to bury Pittsburgh, and they didn't capitalize on those. And whenever Chicago made a turnover, Pittsburgh capitalized on it, but they couldn't capitalize in overtime. They couldn't beat this team outright. And another amazing stat is that Mike Glennon is now 2-0 versus the Pittsburgh Steelers in his career. That's a stat of the day. That would be a good stat of the day thing that Seton O'Connor could use on the Dan Patrick Show. Mike Glennon is 2-0 versus the Steelers in his career now.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that Ben Roethlisberger went 22 for 39, 235 yards and a touchdown. So while he didn't have the game he was accustomed to having, he had a pretty decent game.
Especially when you consider those injuries up front on the offensive line, not having Gilbert at right tackle or Foster at left guard. That made things harder for him.
Yeah, but still, I mean, the Chicago Bears, a team bereft of talent, it's hard to imagine how such a talentless team could walk into Pittsburgh and win.
Well, Ben threw a deep ball to Martavis Bryant where he got past coverage on the very first play of the game, but Bryant dropped the pass. And that could have affected Bryant psychologically after that play because Martavis Bryant arguably his worst game of the season. Bryant only had 2 receptions for 30 yards. He was targeted 8 times in the game. So that play where he dropped the deep pass that would have been an easy touchdown for Pittsburgh, psychologically, he wasn't the same after that. And 2 receptions on 8 targets is absolutely inexcusable when you're the number 2 target on the Pittsburgh Steelers. Juju Smith-Schuster had more yards than Bryant. So that tells you that Bryant's probably not going to get extended unless he pulls it together.
Yeah, I mean, they've got so many issues right now in both places, really. I think Pittsburgh, I think their big issue, one of their big issues, probably their biggest, is offensive line depth. And it's a huge issue, as we saw here this week, that offensive line depth probably cost them a win against a team that had no business even competing with them. And that's something that we're going to have to go, that they're going to have to look at going forward.
Yeah, because if Marcus Gilbert and Ramon Foster are out versus the Ravens next week, I think that gives the advantage to Baltimore, because I think Baltimore is going to be pissed after getting embarrassed on Yahoo, on national online television, and they're going to want to come out and make a statement in front of their home crowd. So this is a big game for Pittsburgh next week, and we were expecting both the Ravens and the Steelers to be 3-0 heading into next week's game, but now they're both 2-1, and they're still battling for first place.
Yeah, and I think that this just brings another element to the NFC North, or the AFC North, because it's a division that right now, let's look at it this way. Cleveland has shown promise in their 3 losses. Baltimore lost when they should have won. They got absolutely destroyed. Then you have Steelers who lost when they should have won. I mean, this division is wide open right now, and there's a lot of talent there, and any of these teams could go right in there and swoop up the division.
Yeah, Tweet was also inactive along with TJ Watt, so that really killed the Steelers defensively. So, and Steelers fans were upset that they didn't. Some of the Steelers fans were upset that they didn't stand for the anthem. That's a different issue. I really don't want to get into it right now, but that was one of the things that they were upset about, and some fans were defending the decision too, saying that.
Well, here's what I'm going to put this to rest now. This was not a protest of the flag. This was not a protest of the police. This was a protest of Donald Trump's comments, because you look at what happened all over the league, whether you were kneeling in arm, whether you were standing in arm, no matter what you were doing, you were in arm solidarity with your teammates. And this is a situation where everybody from the owners have come out in defense of the players for doing this. Everybody, the players that come out from in defense of them doing this, hell, even Roger Goodell came out and said that he was defending the players for doing this. And, you know how hard it is to get Roger Goodell to come out and say, hey, leave our guys alone. Our guys are doing what they do best, and they have a right to do this if they want to, even if you don't agree with it. It's in the Constitution. To get Goodell to come out in favor of the players, Donald Trump has inadvertently, while doing his normal, it is he does when he talks, gotten the NFL to be more, at least for 1 week, to be more solidified and less divisive than they have in the last 20 years that I've heard them.
Donald Trump's ignorance unified the NFL this week.
This week, whatever happens going forward, I don't care. This is the most unified that I've seen the NFL since 9/11. These guys are coming out and, they're just all showing that they are one group. And this is one of these things. And they showed, in my opinion, why America is one of those countries why America stands for basically, we can sit here and rip our own throats out. But if you come into our house, we're coming together. We're uniting against you. Donald Trump tried to jump into the NFL, and those players just got arm in arm, and it's like, no, we're not doing this. This is our house. And in America, you can do that. So, and I think at least for this week, the NFL has been solidified, and basically the shield has been put up in front of the league to take Roger Goodell's statement
Well, right
about
now, Marcus Gilbert has a hamstring injury. We don't know when this injury occurred, but hamstring injuries can be pretty serious. So this is something we're going to need to watch, because Chris Hubbard was the starting right tackle with Gilbert absent, and with Foster absent, B.J. Finney, a backup from Kansas State that was an undrafted free agent that they signed, he was starting at left guard, and those two are awful on Sunday. So that is the hamstring injury with Gilbert. That's going to be something we're going to need to watch. How serious do you think a hamstring injury is at this point?
Well, right now, a hamstring injury is, I'm talking to somebody who's ripped the crap out of a hamstring before. Hamstrings are not serious in the sense that they take a long time to recover. Hamstrings are serious in the sense that if you do not do it correctly, if you do not help it correctly, and then even if you do treat it correctly, help it along correctly, it can still recur. It is a major recurring injury. It will linger. It will stay with you. So in that sense, yeah, it is definitely one of those injuries that will stay with a player.
Yeah, Watt missed the second game in a row due to a groin injury, but Gilbert has a hamstring that caused him to be ruled out on Sunday. I think it took place in the third quarter against the Vikings last week. So I don't know if he'll be ready for Baltimore or not, but that's one of the reasons. But it's very close. I mean, it honestly could go either way between Pittsburgh and Baltimore. You're going to see a lot closer of a game, and you're going to see both teams playing much smarter football next week.
Yeah, and on a note, we're going to move on to one of the games that I considered putting into our feature section, but ultimately just decided against it. We are going to go Atlanta beating Detroit on what was possibly taking it. They beat them by about a foot. Let's put it that way. Golden Tate had the touchdown catch late. They called it a touchdown. They went back and reviewed it. They called the touchdown back. They missed the touchdown that would have put them ahead and ultimately won the game by about a foot. So Matthew Stafford ended the game just shy of another comeback victory, 25 of 45, 264 yards and a touchdown. With Golden Tate, 7 receptions, 58 yards, 1 touchdown, a foot short of a second touchdown. This was one of those games. Then you go to Atlanta. Matt Ryan, 24 of 35, 294 yards, 2 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Ryan didn't have a great game. He was accurate for the most part, got the yards, and his inaccuracies. He had great plays by Detroit's defense with 3 interceptions. Devontae Freeman, 21 yards, 21 attempts, 106 yards, a touchdown. He had a great game. Julio Jones, 7 receptions, 91 yards. Taylor Gabriel, 5 receptions for 79 yards. Coleman, 3 receptions for 43 yards. This was one of those games that you really, Darius Slay for the Lions with 2 interceptions and 5 tackles. This was just a great game, and I think it deserves a little bit more time. So we're going to go, Chris, give us what you got on this one, because this was a slobber knocker, to steal a line from JR.
Yeah, this was a slaughter knocker, and JR.
Slobber.
I think you were referencing the TV show Dallas with JR.
No. I was referencing legendary wrestling announcer who works part-time for the Oklahoma Sooners, Jim Ross, as an announcer.
Okay.
He's a slobber knocker, and Jim Ross was referencing that TV show. But Jim Ross goes slobber knocker, not slaughter knocker. We're not slaughtering anyone. Slobber, as in what your dog does.
Yeah, that's a good point. And with the Falcons-Lions game, I said last week in my Monday night recap for the Lions over the Giants, I said last week that Detroit's secondary is playing at a Super Bowl level. You're seeing Darius Slay play like a number 1 corner. You're seeing Lawson play like a number 2 corner in the boundary. You're seeing Diggs play like a nickel. You're seeing Killebrew and Quinn play incredible at safety. Both of them had interceptions against Eli on Monday night. So I guess the Falcons game planned around those guys and said, we're not going to focus on throwing their way. And Darius Slay stepped up and made some big plays. And you got Tavon Wilson from the Patriots for depth. So the Lions have an incredible secondary. I'll give Bob Quinn all the credit in the world. But I think the biggest reason Atlanta was able to win was due to their running game. Jarrad Davis wasn't active for this game. I know the Giants, they laid I think it was Odell or somebody, they laid a really cheap shot hit on Jarrad Davis last week on Monday Night Football. So he was ruled inactive for this game. And I think that gave the Falcons the advantage to exploit the running game because their offensive line won the battle in the trenches against Detroit's defensive line. And without Jarrad Davis, it was just an easy matchup for Atlanta to exploit. And I'm surprised they didn't run the ball more, but they got the win. That's what matters.
Yeah, and, I'll say they get the win. That's what matters, yes. But this is 2 teams that I think could potentially meet in the playoffs. And that's the thing. People weren't quite sure when I said, yeah, I think the Lions are going to be one of the best teams in the NFL this year. They've proven through the first 3 weeks, not only are they one of the best teams in the NFL this year, that they are a team that can stick with the Lions, who became the first 3-0 team that has lost in the Super Bowl to go 3-0 since the Seahawks did it back a few years ago. So, this Detroit team is, I think, ready to not only go, but to really put up some great, not only numbers, but some wins, which is something that I don't think any of us expected. And Jim Caldwell, for leading the Lions to the playoffs, I think for 2 straight years now, it's got a contract extension.
Yeah, he got a contract extension this weekend.
Yeah, the details when I looked were not readily available, but that shows to everybody said Caldwell would be a terrible hire. I think he learned from Tony Dungy. Then with his first head coaching job, he made a lot of mistakes. He wasn't authoritative. And he did. He made a lot of mistakes with that situation.
But
So
he
when he
was
was,
the offensive coordinator on the team that won the
yeah,
Super Bowl with Flacco, and then he went back to Detroit.
yeah, and I think he learned. Then he went and worked under Harbaugh, which I think if you work under Harbaugh and you don't come out with some type of fire lit under your ass, there's something wrong with you. Um, and then he went to Detroit, and I think that the combined experiences of his first failed head coaching job, which most people fail in their first head coaching jobs, especially whether it's the NFL or going from NCAA to NFL or wherever, and then on to working with a Harbaugh, who was a second generation coach. I think that Caldwell probably learned a few things, and in his second stint, he's just done a remarkable job with this Detroit team. And if there's anything that's going to hold them back, I think it's going to be the running game. Amir Abdullah only had 14 attempts for 47 yards in this game, and
Atlanta's got a really good run defense, though, with Grady Jarrett and
yeah,
Ontari Poe from the Chiefs. Plus, they got linebackers like Deion Jones, Devondre Campbell. They've got guys that can stop the run. So
yeah, but with Abdullah, he's got 46 carries, but he's only got 163 yards on the year. That's 3.5 yards per rush, and he's got no touchdowns on the year. So for Abdullah, he has got to get the wheels churning on that running game, because that seems to me what's going to hold back the Lions. Because you can't have, no matter how good Stafford is, how good his arm is, he's probably one of the best, I'd say top 5 pocket passers in the NFL. You can't have him throwing 45 passes every game. You've got to have more than 17 combined rushes in a game. You need to get that number up 20, 25 rushes. Yeah, you need to get that number down 30, 35 passes a game. And you can't do that if you're not running the ball at least 25 times. And you have to be effective so you can get that up to that point.
Yeah, Jim Bob Cooter, the offensive coordinator in Detroit, talked about wanting to learn more about the running backs because he's awesome with developing the passing game. He was a QB's coach and O-line coach. He's awesome with developing the passing game. He wanted to learn more about mastering the running game, and he applied that versus the Giants, but he sort of went away from that versus the Falcons.
And that's the thing that I say about coaches that say, we're going to run the ball. We want to run the ball. We want to run the ball. But what they don't tell you is, yeah, we want to run the ball. We want to make that the focal point of our offense. But our running backs ain't, they're not just going to come out and say, our running backs really suck. I mean, these guys are not giving us an opportunity to win here. So we can't run the ball as much as we want to because our running backs ain't getting shit done. Yeah, they can't come out and say that. I know they would like to sometimes, but it's just not a thing.
Yeah.
And Atlanta, on the other hand, ran the ball 27 times, 152 combined yards. I mean, backs that are doing the job.
Great thing is they got Brian Hill in the 5th round last year, and they haven't even needed to use him yet because they've extended Freeman. They've got Tevin Coleman for another 2 years, so they can let him learn the system, and he'll contribute at some point down the road. He'll do what Coleman does if they don't extend him. That's basically...
Yeah, if they extend Coleman, though, it's like, well, Mr. Hill, it's thank you for your service. We wish you well in your future endeavors.
Yeah.
Because I think no matter how good Matt Ryan is, Freeman and Coleman, these two guys, if they keep them along with Jones and Gabriel, that right there is the core of your offense. And all they have to do is keep Matt Ryan, nice and happy.
They've already extended both of their offensive tackles for another 4 years, and Jake Matthews and Ryan Schrader. And that's the flaw Seattle made. That was the biggest mistake Seattle made, is they tried to extend all their defensive players, but they didn't focus on extending the offensive line. And that's the biggest reason why Russell Wilson hasn't gotten back to a Super Bowl yet. Now, Dan Quinn learned from that mistake in Seattle, and they already corrected that in Atlanta, so there's stability everywhere on the offense now, and there's stability in a lot of areas in the defense. It's a very young team, so there's a lot of good things.
And we had to look at it this way. A lot of quarterbacks who are kept clean, and let's face it, Matt Ryan hasn't been on the floor that much in his career. I'm going to look at his sack total here. 17 as a rookie, 19, 23, 26, 28. So for the first 5 years, he wasn't sacked a whole lot. The next year in 2013, 44 sacks, he was sacked a lot. 2014, 31 sacks. 2015, 30 sacks. 2016, 37, which is a pretty high number. And so far this year, 7 sacks. So the offensive line throughout his career have only had 2 years or so of high sacks in his 9-year career. He's 32. If you're not sacked that much, this is what happens. This is when quarterbacks are able to play past 33 years old, is when they're not sacked at a high point. Ryan has not been sacked to the point to where his body's going to break down on him yet. So that's something that you have to realize, is that his body is holding up pretty well, and his offensive line has been extended, so that's probably going to continue. So he's probably going to play for a few more years.
I would say at least 3 to 4 more years. I can't give you an exact total, but what I can tell you is that 1.5 sacks is the total amount of sacks that Matthews has surrendered during 3 games. And the reason I'm able to get that information is because stats.washingtonpost.com gives you football player stats for the offensive lineman. No other site does that. NFL.com doesn't do that. ESPN doesn't do that. No other site gives you that kind of data. So Schrader's only allowed 1 sack in 2 games. He was out for the Detroit game. So they had some difficulty at right tackle, but they were still able to play well enough, and I'll give Freeman all the credit in the world for that. What's our next game?
I see how you're just going to rush through.
We have so many games we need to get to, though.
Just gonna rush through.
I'm not gonna rush through anything.
Yeah, the next game is the Cleveland Browns losing in dramatic fashion in the last seconds to Indianapolis. It was one of those games that the Browns, Deshaun Kaiser nearly had his first comeback win. And this is a game where I'm going to put the loss mostly on the coaching staff. I know I really haven't done that before, but I want you to look at a few stats. Deshaun Kaiser, 22 of 47 passing. He threw 47 passes. There were 7 more runs that he made. Most were passes where his receivers didn't get open. So that is 54 plays by Deshaun Kaiser. 54 out of 69 plays went through with Deshaun Kaiser either running or passing the ball. They weren't rushing attempts. There were only 12 rushing attempts the entire game. Kaiser led the team in rushing, was tied for the lead in rushing, led him in rushing touchdowns and attempts. He had 3 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. One of them came on a final Hail Mary to end the game. Now, the receivers had 4 offensive pass interference penalties, and I think this says 7 or 8 drops. So you have to put it on the coaches for saying, look, he's a 21-year-old rookie. You know, he's not Tom Brady. He's not Matthew Stafford. He's not one of these guys who have been in the league. They're just going to throw and throw and throw and keep throwing. And make everything right. Yeah, he's getting experience making throws in NFL games. Woohoo. Right now, that's not going to get you wins. It's not going to get you wins. Rookies should not be throwing and accounting for 90% of your offense. I mean, rookie quarterbacks should not be put in that position, and they put him in that position. Second point, the pass interference penalties, one by DeValve at tight end, one by Kenny Britt. I think he said one by Njoku, and one by Ricardo Lewis. There's 4 of them. Kenny Britt dropped a pass in the end zone. One of the reporters asked if it was because it was behind him a little bit, and Britt said, no, I got my hands on it. I was supposed to catch it, and I dropped it. So this is one of those situations to where Higgins dropped a few passes, Britt dropped some passes. It was a tough situation, and the Browns nearly came back and pulled off a win. They were out of timeouts by the time the 2-minute warning came. But you know what, Chris, I think you'll agree, you cannot win with a rookie quarterback having that much pressure on him and wide receivers not giving any help to the team.
You have a rookie quarterback and you don't have a supporting cast, you don't have an offensive line or a running game, he will struggle, because we saw that with Eli. Eli did well eventually, but he struggled his rookie year. He didn't really take off until they shortened out the offensive line and got Plaxico. So Eli struggled as a rookie. Ben did well as a rookie because they had a good offensive line in place along with Bettis. So, and Hines and Plaxico, and they got Heath Miller after his rookie year. So that's why Ben thrived as a rookie, whereas someone like Eli Manning didn't thrive, or Jared Goff didn't thrive, or Alex Smith didn't thrive. Rookies go through rough years. I mean, Peyton Manning had more interceptions as a rookie than any other quarterback in the league. And Tom Brady didn't play as a rookie, but that's a different story for a different day. The point is, you got to make sure your rookie quarterback is in a situation where they can make plays without having to overdo it.
Yeah, and now if you look on the opposite end of the spectrum, you have Jacoby Brissett. He made some nice passes. Kaiser took some steps forward. He showed a lot better touch in this game on his deep passes. He wasn't throwing lasers. He made some really nice strides in his mechanics in this game. So we'll give him credit. Where Brissett, he was making these things like he was a veteran, and he is a little bit more of a veteran. So he looked like the veteran that was just going in there, running the offense, doing what he needed to do, where Kaiser, calm like a veteran, he was making some veteran decisions, but he was also making a lot of rookie mistakes. And you can see the improvement, and you can see some of the steps back he was taking, and you could also see some of the frustration, which is something that you'll get from a rookie more than you will as long as the veteran's not Phillip Rivers. I mean, he shows everything. But, so you're looking at kind of a tale of two quarterbacks here when it comes to, you got the rookie, you got the veteran. Even though Brissett's only like a 2-year veteran, I mean, he conducted himself more like a veteran.
Texans as a rookie when the Patriots played the Texans last year and beat the Texans. So,
yeah, and now I want to tell you something we were talking about last game with the running. Isaiah Crowell with 12 rushes, Deshaun Kaiser or Duke Johnson with 2 for 23 and a touchdown. And so that's 14 rushes. And I think there's one more by Days. And Gore in himself, that's 15 rushes. Gore by himself, Frank Gore, 25 rushes, 57 yards. 25 for 57. Crowell has not performed extremely well this year, but neither has Frank Gore. and they still gave Frank Gore 25 touches. They need to give Crowell about 20 touches, whether he's performing well or not. Just because right now teams are like, in that first game when Kaiser played so well, they were like, okay, they were prepared for the run and pass. Now they're like, well, they're not going to run it that much anyway, so heck, let's just sit back on the pass. This isn't. I mean, you can see it in the Colts, and you can see it in the Browns. The Browns, on paper, were a vastly superior team, with the Colts not having Andrew Luck and either of their corners. Planning was not there in this game, and the receivers were not there. So between the two, you just weren't going to overcome it, and I think that's why the Colts ended up winning the way they did. But give the Browns credit, give Deshaun Kaiser credit. He came back in the fourth quarter, showed a lot of heart, but it just wasn't enough. Next game, we're going all the way to Tampa Bay and Minnesota, with Minnesota beating Tampa Bay 34-17. Now, this was one I looked at and I was like, wow. Case Keenum for 33, 369 yards, 3 touchdowns. Dalvin Cook with a hello, I am here NFL moment with 27 carries, 97 yards, and a touchdown. And then Stephon Diggs is like, hey, don't forget about me, people. I'm still here. I was the breakout rookie last year. 8 receptions, 173 yards, 2 touchdowns.
But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, Minnesota just completely – those 3 guys just like, hey, look at this game. We're going to – this is our game. This is our house. We're going to take it. And they did.
You got to give that offense credit for igniting. But at the same time, Tampa Bay's defense went through a barrage of injuries. Let's start with the second quarter. Levante David left the game with an injury. You lost Gerald McCoy and Vernon Hargreaves, all got injured in this game. So I don't know if any of those guys are going to be healthy moving forward, but Gerald McCoy is the glue to your defensive line. Levante David's the heart of your linebacking core, and Vernon Hargreaves is going to be the face of your defensive backfield next year when Grimes' contract runs out. So these are the 3 players on this defense you probably don't want to lose to injuries at all under any circumstances. Arguably 2 of your 3 best defensive players in McCoy and David as well. So this is huge for Tampa Bay that they lost these guys. I don't know if they're going to lose these guys for extended time, but without those guys, Minnesota had no problems exploiting that defense, and it showed on Sunday.
Yeah, and as we're saying, we're not going to take anything for any reason away from
Minnesota earned that victory.
Tampa Bay. Minnesota, we're not taking anything away from that offense. Case Keenum played a miraculous game.
He played lights out. He's 3-0 versus Jameis Winston. My issue here is Tampa Bay, these injuries moving forward, they've got 2 home games against the Giants and New England on Thursday night in a few weeks. And if they don't have these guys against those games, you're talking about a team that's going to have to start 1-3 and win 2 on the road against Arizona and Buffalo in road environments. So they've already lost their first road game. So Tampa Bay may end up having to settle for a wild card instead of the division at this point because of this. But it depends on how serious the injuries are with these guys moving forward.
Yeah, and we will be looking at that, and hopefully they have an update on that soon, because
Gerald McCoy had a walking boot on his right ankle. He willed himself to finish the game because the team needed him, and he was actually in the game for 63 of 74 defensive snaps. So maybe his injury. Levante here, Union Tribune has just reported, Tampa Bay, San Diego Union Tribune has reported that Levante David will miss time. He will miss some games. Gerald McCoy will play hurt again. He will play through the injury like he did versus Minnesota. because Hargraves came back into the game after being injured as well. So they're going to have Gerald McCoy and Hargraves next week, but they will not have Levante David versus the Giants, and maybe not versus New England. But they will have both two players playing injured. So
yeah, well, that is great news for Tampa Bay, and we hope those guys get back soon because that defense is one of the best potential defenses in the NFL.
But it relies a lot on those three players, McCoy being the glue to that line, David being the heart of the linebackers, and Hargraves being the upcomer. That's probably going to be the future feature corner on that secondary. So,
yeah, and next we have another feature game. It is New England versus Houston. New England beating Houston 36-33. Now, this is one game that this was a tale of two quarterbacks, and I'm not talking two quarterbacks, one played well and one didn't play well. This is Deshaun Watson going 22 of 33, saying, "Hello, NFL," 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, and Tom Brady coming out with 25 of 35, 378 yards, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions, and these guys were just both lights out.
Yeah, both quarterbacks had 300 passing yards. Both quarterbacks had passer ratings of 90 or higher in this game. So that's one thing to take into account here with Watson. He was 22 for 33, 301. Brady was 25 for 35. So while both quarterbacks did make some bad throws at times, both quarterbacks also made some huge plays in this game. And I'm looking at this game. Houston got the ball first. New England's defense made a good stop early in the game. They didn't have Hightower for the entire game, and I'm surprised Houston didn't run it as much without Hightower in the game. Brady connected with Gronk early. Houston had a good drive where they had to settle for a field goal, and then then both teams kept playing defense, back-to-back 3-and-out. So Houston's able to hold Brady to some 3-and-outs early in this game, and then Watson threw the touchdown to Ellington. The Texans led after one quarter. The Texans led at around halftime. They had a fumble recovery by Clowney, which went for a touchdown. Merciless fumbled it. Clowney forced the fumble. Clowney recovered the fumble. Houston led 20-14 at one point. New England had a 5-minute drop. Houston had a 5-minute drive that resulted in a field goal. Houston was able to take time off the clock. Brady was able to put together a quick drive. And Houston had the ball for 9 minutes in the first half compared to New England, who only had it for 5 minutes and 21 seconds, whereas Houston had it for 9 minutes and 39 seconds. So Houston did a great job taking away time of possession from Tom Brady early in this game. The Patriots got the ball to start the second half. Brady threw it to Cooks. Cooks gave the Patriots a 28-20 lead, and that on a quick scoring drive with a 5-minute 33-play drive where Watson able to use time of possession in order to get the ball downfield. Van Noy had an illegal contact play, which gave Houston a first down on their drive. It was 27-28. Brady got sacked. There was a fumble. It looked like Brady threw a completion to Gronkowski on this fumble, but it was ruled down, so Houston got the ball back late in the third quarter. Houston took over heading into the fourth quarter. They put together a 4-minute, 29-second drive to give themselves a 30-28 lead. And then the Texans, they put together a drive. They eventually punted it, but they took 3 minutes off the clock. They held New England to another 3-and-out to start the fourth quarter. So 2 3-and-outs. Then they put together a 3-minute, 31-second drive where they take a 33-21 lead. The Patriots got the ball back with 2 minutes and 34 seconds. Tom Brady had one drive to drive this Texans team downfield. There was a holding penalty on David Andrews, which made it 2nd and 20 at the New England 15. But Brady kept his cool. He made a huge completion to Rob Gronkowski for 15 yards. First down. Brady sacked Mike. It was a fumble, but it was recovered by center David Andrews. There was an incomplete pass that was a dropped interception by Houston, but then you had New England really controlling the ball here. Houston had the ball for 9 minutes and 50 seconds in the second half. So you're talking Houston having the ball for at least 18 to 19 minutes in this game, whereas New England, the ball that long. So Houston clearly won the time of possession. Houston had the ball for 9 minutes and 50 seconds in the fourth quarter, and they still lost because Brady had the ball at the end of the game when it matters most. So this was not a clean win for New England, but it was – and you really got to give Houston a lot of credit and effort. I know there were some Texans fans that were discouraged after the game, but this Texans team really tested us, and they played their heart out. They deserve a lot of credit for that. Brady, 5 touchdowns, no interceptions. He did have 3 fumbles in the game, but interceptions, and that's why the Patriots got a narrow victory over the Texans.
Yeah, and I said it last week that I thought that Deshaun Watson was going to make a name for himself here. He and Kaiser, I think, it's pretty well known. They were my 2 top quarterbacks in this draft. And I really like Peterman and a couple of those others. And I think as far as Watson goes, he is right now, I think O'Neal is doing a very good job tailoring an offense to his skill set. And yeah, just to make a point, Watson was also 8 for 41 yards rushing. So, I mean, he did a good job in that regard as well.
I still like Mahomes the best, and I like Kaiser after that. But Watson can play in this league, and he can be a gamer. So for me to sit here and say he's probably going to be a backup at best, I'll admit that I'm wrong on that right now because he looks very good. He looked a lot better than Kaiser against a very good Patriots defense. So Watson, and that's the guy I think Mark had Watson as his top QB along with Trubisky, and I think the Cowpote had Watson as his top QB. He thought the Bears should have took Watson at 2 when they traded up instead of Trubisky. So I'll give him credit there. Anything you'd like to add before we get to our next game? Because the Patriots balled out, the Texans balled out.
Yeah, I'm just bring attention. I don't really think anybody really paid as much attention to it with all the quarterbacking and everything going on. But you had Brandon Cooks, who everybody wrote off as, just another failed receiver. And here he had 5 receptions, 131 yards. Well, the Hogan had 4 receptions for 68 yards. So I just wanted to point out that, yeah, there are a couple of these guys that are really coming on for New England as well. It's just not a
Hogan
story of
guys. Whenever I started him in fantasy against the Chiefs, I lost. And whenever I benched him the last 2 weeks, he's dominated. So Hogan's one of these players who, I don't know. We'll see what happens with Hogan next week. I think he'll have a big game versus Carolina next week too, though, because their secondary receivers against that secondary. So I'll probably start him next week. But that's the thing.
It's all Chris's fault. Going next, we're just going to mention this briefly. The New York Jets beat the Miami Dolphins. Jay Cutler was 26 for 44, 220 yards and a touchdown, where Josh McCown was 18 for 23, 249 yards and a touchdown. Other than that, there was really nothing of note happen in that game. So we are going to move on to
Anderson some credit. 3 receptions, 93 receiving yards, 1 receiving touchdown. He showed he can be an asset and maybe a number 1 target down the road. This
maybe.
So that's pretty much all I'm going to say about the Jets.
And now we're going to Philadelphia, where the Eagles beat the Giants in a close one, 27-24. Eli Manning was 35 of 47, 366 yards, 3 touchdowns, one of the best games of his career. And Carson Wentz went 21 for 31 176 yards, 1 touchdown. Not a great game. But Nelson Aguilar, 2 receptions, 20 yards. Alshon Jeffrey, 4 receptions, 56 yards. Zach Ertz, 8 receptions, 55 yards. Sterling Shepard, 7 receptions for 133 and a touchdown for the Giants. Odell Beckham, 9 receptions for 79 yards, 2 touchdowns for the Giants. So, game to watch from really anybody's perspective if you're a football fan. And it would have been a really fun game. Chris?
It was really fun to watch. The Eagles led 14-0. Then Odell Beckham, Eli Manning just really began clicking in the fourth quarter after 2 or 3 sloppy third quarters. And the Giants led 24-21 at one point, but the Eagles came back. They got a field goal late in the game, and then they got a 61-yard field goal to win the game from rookie kicker Jake Elliott. And for those of you who are wondering, that is the same Jake Elliott that the Bengals drafted in the 5th round, 2 rounds before Zane Gonzalez. And they ended up cutting him from the 53-man roster. So the Eagles picked him up, and he won the game for the Eagles with a huge 61-yard kick. So terrible decision by the Bengals to cut Jake Elliott. They could have used that clutchness versus the Packers, and I'm sure we'll get to that game and some of the late games because I think this is the final early game that we are recapping, Joey, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, next game that will be recapped is the
Carson Wentz.
Seattle Seahawks and Tennessee Titans. So, yeah, this is our last early game.
All right, and this is the first late game on that note. So Seattle going to Tennessee, and both the quarterbacks were lights out today. But I want to bring up the hit, the Richard Sherman targeting hit on Marcus Mariota in the first quarter when the game was still scoreless because Sherman already had an unsportsmanlike penalty before that. So now he's targeting a Mariota, and Taylor Lewan, the left tackle, gets all up in Sherman's face like, that's my quarterback. You don't mess with my quarterback unless you want your butt kicked, son. And he's getting all confrontational up in Sherman's face, getting all up in Sherman's grill. So, yeah.
Well, that's what an offensive lineman is supposed to do. Offensive lineman, number one job, protect the quarterback at all times for every situation. And so
he did his job, and that offensive line sharpened up as soon as they saw Mariota take that hit, get up, look completely unfazed. A level of respect for Mariota grew immensely, and the team balled out from there.
Yeah, and give Tennessee credit. They have done an excellent job of building that offensive line into what it is now. The big story, I don't think, we had Russell Wilson with a monster game, 29 for 49 yards, 373 yards, 4 touchdowns. But I'm looking through, and I really want to look at the receivers because I think this is less about the quarterbacks and more about what they did. I want to just bear with me here for a second. Doug Baldwin, 10 receptions for Seattle. Jimmy Graham, 7 receptions. Procise, 3 receptions. Wilson, 3 receptions. Lockett, 2 receptions. Richardson, 2 receptions. Carson, 2 receptions. Then go over to Tennessee. Matthews, 6 receptions. Decker, 4 receptions. Walker, 4 receptions. Smith, 1 reception. Taylor, 2 receptions. Henry, 1 reception. Murray, 1 reception. Supernall, 1 reception. These guys, it was not just they were passing the ball, they were getting yards, they were getting touchdowns. They were spreading the ball around everywhere. And it wasn't just the majority of the catches went to 1 or 2 receivers. There were catches by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 different receivers in this game. Now, that's a heck of a number for catches in an NFL game.
And Corey Davis was inactive for the Titans in this game. They didn't have him for this game. So for them to just ball out like this with Mariota is beyond impressive. It speaks volumes. Wilson, 29 for 49, 375, 4 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. Mariota, 225, 2 passing touchdowns, no interceptions. He went 20 for 32. He was a little bit more accurate, but his toughness after taking that hit by Sherman, along with the brilliant decision-making he made throughout the game, led Tennessee to a victory. They are 2-1. They are in control of their own destiny in the AFC South right now, but they head to Houston next week, where that could be a game where Watson rebounds. I think the AFC South division is the one division we're going to see the most parity in, because Ian Rappaport reported yesterday that Andrew Luck is expected to be back by week 6 when the Colts go to Tennessee for Monday Night Football. And Seattle will probably beat the Colts without Andrew Luck in front of their home crowd next week on Sunday Night Football. But then the Colts host the 49ers. And if Brissett can outplay Hoyer like he did this week in front of the home crowd, then the Colts can be 2-3 with Andrew Luck coming back on Monday night. And I think in that situation, if you're 2-3 and Luck's coming back on Monday Night Football with more rest, I think you're fine and it doesn't really affect you that much. And you could still make something happen. But time is going to be an issue here, and it could honestly go either way. I still think the Colts could win this division at 9-7, but Luck, Mariota, this is the division we're going to see the most parity in, the AFC South. I'm already telling you, Joey, this is the division where we're going to see a lot of movement in. We're going to see the Jaguars dominate early. We're going to see the Texans do well early because they get some home games against Kansas City, against Tennessee, against Cleveland. They get 3 consecutive home games coming up, so Watson's going to have an advantage with that. This is the division you're going to see the most parity in. I think we've said it numerous times on both of our podcasts, but the AFC South, this is the division you're going to see the parity in.
Yeah, and whereas the AFC North, you're going to see the competition, and the AFC South, you're going to see the parity. So the AFC is very well balanced at this point in time. And speaking of the NFC North, we're going back there for another one of the toughest games this week, with the Green Bay Packers beating the Cincinnati Bengals in overtime. Now, this game was a game for the life of my colleagues Chris and Ryan, because if the Packers would have lost this, Lisa Donovan would have murdered both of them in ways that you would never have imagined. Okay, this would have been brutal. And I was kind of upset, though, because that means with the Packers winning, I wouldn't get a tape of this happening to both of them. So I am extremely disappointed in that. But I'm extremely happy that we're able to do this broadcast and future broadcasts uninhibited and without Chris in a body cast. So, Lisa, thank you for not destroying my co-host, because that would have been far too difficult to find another one in short notice. I mean, you really did me a favor there. So
I was spared. Ryan was spared. Thank you, Lisa. You are the best. And Cincinnati, Green Bay, Andy Dalton began this game 9 for 10. He's really clicking early in the game. And Bill Lazor did awful as an offensive coordinator in Miami, but he actually looked a lot better. He looked like he had learned from his mistakes in this game early with Cincinnati, and he did an okay job early in the game. I mean, but Cincinnati just controlled the clock in the first quarter. They had the ball for 11 minutes and 43 seconds in the first quarter, whereas Green Bay only had the ball for 3 minutes and 17 seconds. And it was tied at 7 after Aaron Rodgers' opening drive. There were some Adam Jones had a pass interference call. So there was a play where Dre Kirkpatrick, it appeared he recovered a fumble, but the call was reversed. The Packers kept the drive alive. That was huge, because if that call does not get reversed in the first quarter, Cincinnati wins, and I might be dead.
Yeah, and I might have to find another co-host on short notice. That would have been difficult and would have been a hassle. So, once again, thank you to Lisa for not killing him, and thank you to Aaron Rodgers for going 28.
You have to thank the officials as well as Lisa, though, because if the officials don't overturn that call, I'm in a body bag.
No, I'm thanking Aaron Rodgers, because Aaron Rodgers is still one of the best to ever play the game. 28 for 42, 313 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception, which I'm sure was a complete misunderstanding, and the defense apologized immediately after.
Well, I think the player in this game who really deserves the credit for Green Bay is not Aaron Rodgers.
Allison.
It is Jones,
Yes.
the rookie out of North Carolina State, 11 solo tackles, 1 assisted tackle, 2 sacks, did very well in coverage. Josh Jones is the player of this game.
Yeah, and I'm going to give it the player of the game to Geronimo Allison simply for his name. I mean, Geronimo, yeah,
Allison ruined Kerm's playoffs last year. I remember Allison had some big matches against the Cowboys in the divisional round. So Allison had to ruin Kerm's playoff run, but
well, that's fine. I mean, he deserved his playoff run
his
getting.
name's awesome enough for him to ruin. It's like if one guy's going to ruin Kerm's playoff, it's Allison because of the playoff name.
Because he's named Geronimo, he's allowed. And a guy that we were both extremely high on, that I really like. He's in his second year. Blake Martinez, middle linebacker, inside linebacker for the Packers. He had an excellent game as well. He had 7 tackles, 4 of them assisted. So yeah, he had a great game, and I'm a little concerned because this is a featured game. Yes, this is, one of the closest games of the week, but I'm concerned. Joe Mixon had 18 touches. He had, for most part, his best game of his career running was 62 yards and no touchdowns. He had 3 receptions, 39 yards. But something that's really concerning me right now is I know Andy Dalton doesn't have a rifle, but the guy completed 21 passes and he only had 212 yards. A.J. Green had 111 of those. Joe Mixon, 18 rushes. We all know what type of runner he is. He's going to find the hole. He's going to hit you. He's going to hit it hard. Only had 62 yards on 18 rushes.
He had 101 total yards, though. He had 3 receptions for 39 yards plus the 62 rushing yards. So he had 101 total yards. So he finally had 100 total yards. But this is not a guy.
That's not what's
running back
bothering me. What's bothering me is the offensive line play. That you can have a total of 39 plays and from scrimmage and only have 274 yards. I mean, the offensive line, there should be at least 300 yards there because that's less than 10 yards of play. So what's the offensive line doing at this point? That's what concerns me about that. You get where I'm going with it? I mean, there has to be something more to that attack knowing the weapons they have.
Yeah.
So I can see Chris now on his computer just looking up stats trying to figure this thing out.
No, I'm saying Mixon's not all that yet because his offensive line sucks.
Yeah, it's going to take a couple years. The offensive line is going to have to get itself together. Mixon's still learning.
He is.
I mean, that's something that every quarterback's going to go through. He's going to go through his ups. He's going to go through his downs. I don't doubt if one of these times he's going to have a game where he has like an average of 2 yards per rush. He's going to go through his growing pains, and let's face it, they got Hill and Bernard back there with him. So, I mean, they've got their running backs.
Yeah, they've got all of their guys involved. Eifert was out for this game. Tyler Boyd had 1 target. LaFell had 2 targets. Mixon had 3 targets. It was basically A.J. Green and everyone else. They only threw 26. Dalton threw 27 pass attempts, but they have only 26 were targeted to receivers. 1 was an out-of-bounds throw, but 13 of those 26 passes were targeted to A.J. Green. So he took up at least 50% of the offense. And you can argue he took up more than 50% with how he played.
Yeah, and he was AJ Green is one of the best players in the NFL. I mean, there is no doubting that.
Yep.
I am concerned about the quarterback play. Dalton has not been the same since Hugh Jackson left. I seriously wonder if he'll be able to survive this year in Cincinnati.
Yeah, I'm going to pull up the bank. I have my playoffpredictors.com thing up. I'm going to pull up the Bengals schedule and try to figure out when's the right time to make a move, because you have the Browns this week in Cleveland, then you get Buffalo at home, then you have a bye week, then you go to Pittsburgh, then you host the Colts. So I think if the Bengals do not win in one of these games soon, I think they are going to make a move and pull him. And one of the things I predicted the Bengals to go 4-12 and their wins to come against Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Chicago, and Detroit. 3 of those games are at home, and the only reason I'm even considering the Bengals over Pittsburgh at Heinz Field is because the Bengals are off a bye week before they go to Pittsburgh. They have a bye week before Pittsburgh, so if they get 2 weeks to prepare for Pittsburgh and they're winless, they're going to come into Heinz Field really pissed off, and they might steal one from the Steelers. That's all I'm saying. I don't expect them to be a contender or anything, but I'm just saying them and Pittsburgh have history, and if they have 2 weeks to prepare for the Steelers and they're still winless at that point, they're going to be out for blood.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying. The AFC North, it's still up for grabs, and all 4 of these teams have a chance to grab it. I mean, the Browns, Steelers, Bengals, and Ravens are all 4 in the running for this division. The Bengals are the least likely to take it, in my opinion, and most of that's because of Andy Dalton. But the rest of it's because of the offensive line. But at the same time, they're still right there. These teams are losing to teams they shouldn't lose to. I mean, yeah, the Bengals should have lost to the Packers. Other than that, the Browns shouldn't have lost to the Colts. The Steelers sure as hell shouldn't have lost to the Bears.
The Ravens shouldn't.
And the Ravens, I mean, what the hell was that? I mean, they went to New England on vacation, not to play a football game. I mean, that was pretty plain to see. So, I mean, if teams continue to lose to teams they're not supposed to lose to, I mean, a team like the Bengals can be like, well, hell, all we had to do is win the games we're supposed to win.
Yeah, everyone in the media said Pittsburgh would go 13-3, and I was starting to buy into that for a little while, but I had them at 12-4. So if they lose to the Ravens, they could end up falling to 11-5 in my projected records. So we'll see what happens with Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh has the easiest schedule of these teams because their strength of schedule, 473, is the weakest among the AFC North teams. The Ravens at 477 have the second schedule. The Browns have a 449 strength of schedule. So, yeah, they have the third weakest. And the Bengals, I think the Bengals' strength of schedule might be 488. They have the strongest. I guess the Bengals do have the strongest strength of schedule among the AFC North teams, even though they're in last place right now. So that's pretty interesting on a side note. So we'll see what happens now.
It is.
The Browns and Bengals are both 0-3, and whoever loses that game is going to be in a difficult situation that they won't be able to work their way out of.
Yeah, most likely not, but until then, all 4 teams are in it, and the winner of – and who knows, I mean, the Browns or Bengals, no matter who loses that one, may end up making a huge run, and that would be – I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility because they're both good teams, but at the same time, it is highly unlikely, and the Packers are just going to keep being the Packers. We're probably going to see them in the playoffs.
Yeah, I'm looking at the AFC. My top 6 is still New England, Kansas City, Oakland, Indianapolis, Tennessee, Pittsburgh. Those are still my top 6 teams. If Buffalo had lost to Denver, Denver would be 9-7, and they would get the second wild card over the Titans. But that didn't happen, so the Broncos still, I'm looking at an 8-8 team with Denver, but they played Denver plays Oakland next week in Denver, so that's going to be a big game as well. I believe we have one more game to get to. It involves the AFC. I think the final two games both involve AFC West teams. We have Chiefs going to LA and then the Sunday night game.
Yeah, and this goes straight back into your number 2 team, and it's the 3-0 Kansas City Chiefs, as they took care of the Chargers, who are now 0-3, 24-10. Alex Smith, once again, 155 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 16-21 passing.
Lit it up again. I mean, this game was very even up until the end of the game.
Yeah, and
Rivers had a lot of early mistakes that killed the Chargers' momentum and any chance they had of pulling the upset. He had 2 interceptions in the first quarter, and the Chiefs got 10 points or 14 points on both of those big plays. And it was 17-10 in the fourth quarter. Neither team scored in the third quarter. It was 17-10 at halftime, and it was 17-10 until Kareem Hunt had this big run that gave the Chiefs a 24-10 lead, his third consecutive game with over 100 rushing yards. And the Chiefs right now look like a team controlling their own destiny, since the Chiefs and the Falcons are the only 3-0 teams remaining after September. So they're the only teams without losses heading into September, with both teams at 3-0.
And as much as we both love Kareem Hunt, I mean, I want you to look at Alex Smith for a second. 65 of 84 yard completions on the season, 77% passing, 7 touchdowns, no interceptions, no fumbles. The guy is not only playing turnover-free ball, not only throwing the ball accurately, but through 3 games, he's throwing for 774 yards, and he's averaging 9.2 yards per completion. Now, his quarterback rating is 132.7. Alex Smith right now, as much as we want to keep giving all the credit to Hunt, 17 for 172 and a touchdown. Yeah, Hunt is, being absolutely dominating with his season right now, averaging 8.5 yards per carry, 4 touchdowns. But at the same time, Alex Smith it's like he's found the fountain of youth this year. And I'm talking youth, I mean going back to college. Because I don't think he's played this well since he was in college.
Yeah. Alex Smith has really ignited this year, and I think part of it's due to the fact that he knows he's probably not going to be on the Chiefs, so he's basically going lights out, trying to get that big payday. And at this point, if the Chiefs keep winning and they go 16-0, I think you have to keep Alex Smith for another year and let Patrick Mahomes sit and learn for a second year, which I still think Mahomes can be the best QB in the draft, but you give him a second year to learn under Alex Smith. I don't think that really hurts him at all. I mean, it actually might even benefit him, so we'll see.
Yeah, I don't think this hurts. It's never bad to have a veteran quarterback who can in front of a rookie. It's like Aaron Rodgers. He sat in front of he sat behind Brett Favre for almost 2 years. What was it, 2-3 years before he even thought about hitting the field. So, I mean,
a lot of games in prime time coming up. They get Washington next Monday night. We'll get to the Washington-Oakland game in a few minutes, but they get Houston on Sunday Night Football in Week 5 after that. They get the Steelers at home in Week 6. They get a Thursday night game against the Raiders in Oakland, and then they get the Broncos on Monday Night Football in Week 8. So they got a lot of big games coming up. They get Dallas before the bye week, then they get the Giants on the road in New York. So after that, though, they have a pretty easy schedule with 4 of their final 7 games at home, as well as road games against the Broncos, the Jets, and that's pretty much it. So I think the Chiefs are in very good position because they still have they've only played 1 home game. They've already taken 2 games on the road that I didn't expect them to take until the Jason Verrett injury for the Chargers. So they're in very good position right now. And that Pittsburgh-Kansas City game in Week 6 could be huge because I have Pittsburgh winning that game right now. But if the Chiefs keep playing like they are, they'll be in position to get a first-round bye or perhaps even home field. And Pittsburgh – so we're going to really find out a lot more about this Chiefs team over these next few weeks with 4 of their 5 games in prime time and then the Steelers in Week 6 in a game that could ultimately decide what other team besides the Patriots gets that first-round bye. So Because I have both
and
12-4.
and you have to remember, Kansas City beat New England, so there's the tiebreaker there. Kansas City
Yeah,
owns it.
New England
So
and
just
Kansas
keep
City
that in mind.
With the same record, Kansas City would win the tiebreaker in that situation. I do have the Patriots at 14-2, with only one other loss coming to the Raiders in Mexico, and then I have the Chiefs at 12-4. So I have the Chiefs going through a 3-game losing skid starting in Week 5, where they lose to the Texans, lose to the Steelers, and then lose to the Raiders, and then they lose to the Giants on the road in Week 11 following the bye week. But I have them winning every other game this season. So if they can win one of these games that I expect them to lose, and the Patriots lose another game that we expect them to win besides the Oakland game, since they get Atlanta, they get Denver on the road, they get Pittsburgh on the road, this could become very interesting, especially if the Steelers beat the Patriots in Heinz Field, and then Pittsburgh and Kansas City are tied for that number 1 seed. And in that situation, New England would get the wild card, but I still think they would win the Super Bowl, because I think he had the Patriots getting the wild card. He had the Chiefs and the Steelers getting home field and first-round buys, and the Patriots still ended up beating the Chiefs in the AFC Championship game. So that scenario he made really good on paper right now. That's all I'm going to say.
They do look really good on paper. I agree. And for our last game of the night, we're going to look at the Oakland Raiders as they went ahead and lost to the Washington Redskins. It's like they just handed it to him. I don't know. But Kirk Cousins owned this game. He took this game over. He outplayed Derek Carr. He outplayed the Raiders defense. He outplayed everybody. He went 25 of 30, 365 yards, 3 touchdowns. Nobody could touch him. The receiving, his main target was Chris Thompson, the running back, who had a total of 6 receptions, 150 yards, and a touchdown. And this was just a game where Kirk Cousins took over and said, "I will not be denied," and he wasn't.
So Kirk Cousins wasn't denied. So I thought I had Washington finishing 9-7, but I forgot to mark them down as a win on playoff predictors. I forgot to mark them down as a winner over the Rams last week. So they're 2-1. They'd finish 10-6, but they'd get swept by the Eagles. And because of that, the Eagles would get in as the final wild card, while Washington goes 10-6 and misses the playoffs. So that's pretty interesting, though, that we've got 3 teams tied at 10-6 in the NFC East, with Dallas, Philadelphia, and Washington all at 10-6. Dallas sweeping Philly, Philly sweeping Washington. Washington misses out because of that. But Washington, they get the Chiefs on Monday night. They get a bye week. Then they go to San Francisco. Then they face Philly. Well, they host San Francisco off a bye. They face Philly on Monday Night Football. Then they host Dallas. They travel to Seattle, which I think they can win. They host the Vikings coming off a bye week. Then they get New Orleans. Then they get the Giants. So a lot of Washington's home games are going to be early games. They played Philadelphia at home. They've already played 2 home games. They're going to get 3, 4, 5, 6 home games in the first 12 weeks, which means they can start strong. But the one thing that works against them is the end game, because they get the Cardinals and Broncos at home in weeks 15 and 16, but they get the Giants on the road to end the year. They get Dallas on the road in week 13. So 3 of their final 5 games are on the road, and 2 are against division opponents. So Washington, they have to start strong, because they might struggle in the end game portion of the season. Taking care of business right now, but they get the Chiefs on Monday night. So what they did was phenomenal. Norman and Friedland, they both limited the Raiders receivers to 1 reception. Carr struggled in the air, and Cousins balled out. Phenomenal at left tackle. I mean, they gave Morgan Moses, the right tackle, a 5-year extension, even though he gave up a sack to Khalil Mack. So Ryan and I were a little bit puzzled by the decision there to extend their right tackle and to not extend Cousins, but Cousins is balling out so far. They're 2-1, and Washington looks like a team that that's going to be a fun Monday night game next week. Them and Kansas City in Arrowhead Stadium. That's going to be a fun game. So we'll see what happens here. That's going to be interesting, though.
Yeah, and moving on, I want to start off the NCAA portion of the show with a little bit of news here. It's just coming over the wire at ESPN from ESPN senior writer Mark Schlabach. Florida star receiver Antonio Callaway and starting tailback Jordan Scarlett are among 8 players facing a pair of felony charges as a result of the UF Police Department's investigation into a credit card fraud. Callaway and Scarlett are among 7 players facing 2 third-degree felony counts: fraud, swindle, obtaining property under $20,000, and felony fraud impersonation of using or possessing another person's ID without consent. Defensive lineman Jordan Smith faces 3 additional ID fraud charges.
Yeah, with Callaway and Scarlett, I know these were guys that were first to third round picks on Walter Football, but I watched the tape of them. I wasn't really impressed with their tape from the last season, and now they've got off the field issues. So they're going to fall around the same draft range where Caleb Brantley went.
Well, if they're convicted, I mean, they won't play in the NFL. The NFL has been weeding out felons for a while now, and it just won't happen. But we'll get to more news and notes later. That just seemed noteworthy. It was on the front page of ESPN.
A famous politician did get arrested today, but this is a sports show, not a politics show, so I'm not going to announce who got arrested until after the show off the air.
Thank you. Much appreciated, young man. We'll give you a cookie.
I'll eat some famous cookies as a reward after the show.
Very good choice. Very good choice. Starting off with the Thursday kickoff game, we had number 21 South Florida beating Temple 43-7. Quentin Flowers went 8 of 20, 96 passing yards, where Darius Dice for USF had 15 carries for 117 yards, 2 touchdowns. So the passing game for USF didn't do too much, but the running game was absolutely outstanding. Then we went to Friday. We'll go to Friday's game. Number 23 Utah squeaked past Arizona 30-24. Arizona's Brandon Dawkins led the team in passing with 24-42, 248 yards and a touchdown. Then Saturday's games. Number 1 Alabama beat Vanderbilt 59-0. It was a total it was a total mess.
I'm posting a meme about this game because he's a huge Alabama fan. I saw a meme he posted about this game on Facebook, and he messaged me about it.
Yeah, it was basically the backups led Alabama in that game. Number 2 Clemson just steamrolled over Boston College. I'm sorry, Grace. I wish we could have gotten more for you.
It was actually 7-7 in the fourth quarter. I was watching the game on ESPN because I wanted to do more studying on Clellan Ferrell, the sophomore redshirt defensive end for Clemson, and Harold Landry. Hyatt actually won the battles against Landry this time around. Last year, Hyatt got absolutely abused by Harold Landry. This time around, Landry still got some plays off the edge, kept it close, had a hurry against Clemson's right tackle to force interception. But maybe this game puts Hyatt back into the late round consideration because Hyatt has good foot speed. His issue was just maintaining blocks. I feel like this game where he won the battles against Landry, that shows, but it also might show that Landry still has some work to do as far as adding strength and muscle goes. So it's really difficult to say at this point. I want to see more games where Hyatt comes out like this because Bradley Chubb had a great game versus Florida State. I want to see what Hyatt does against Chubb before I just move him back into the first round conversation. But this was a game Hyatt needed to have. And Clemson took over this game in the fourth quarter and won in blowout fashion. But it was 7-7 for 3 quarters, and it actually looked like Grace's team had a shot at pulling the upset.
Yeah, and I wish they would have, simply because Grace is awesome. She deserves a couple wins. Now, moving on, number 3, I got 2 things from this game. The Oklahoma Sooners, number 3, coming in, proved that they don't have a defense that can stop anybody, but they their offense was powerful enough to overcome the Baylor Bears, who are 0-4, 49-41. And the second thing I want to say is that Baker Mayfield finished 13 of 19, 3 touchdowns, and is still on the season without an interception.
Yes, I mentioned that yesterday on the podcast briefly. I also told Ryan that like he had no interceptions, and he said, well, he threw less passing yards than Mason Rudolph. But Mason Rudolph made a lot of mistakes versus TCU. Baker has played 2 NFL corners on Ohio State and Tulane. He's not made a mistake yet through 4 games. And while this is his first game under 300 passing yards, he's still avoided interception. So while this is his worst game of the year so far, it's not a terrible outing when you consider he's played.
Yeah, it's something that a lot of people don't realize. You're not going to get, 300 or 400 passing yards every single game. Yeah, in this game, the leader for the team was Abdul Adams, Oklahoma. He had 11 carries, 164 yards, and a touchdown. The rushing game, their running back was on fire. You might have, Baker Mayfield out there, but if your running back's on fire, you got it. You're on the ball. Give it to him. Let him go. It was a heck of a game from Abdul Adams. So we're not going to take anything away from him in this game and what he did. And Oklahoma, who was number 3, came out on top 49-41. Number 4, Penn State, squeaked out the closest win in conference that you will possibly find in the Big Ten, 21-19 over Iowa. Trace McSorley, a guy I've been high on, had another outstanding game, 31 for 48, 284 yards and a touchdown. Saquon Barkley, you can't say enough. 28 carries, 211 yards and a touchdown, 12 receptions, 94 yards for Barkley as the running back. Clearly the number 1 running back in the country. At this point, I don't think anybody can argue this point.
Yeah, I had Geis ahead of Barkley for much of the process, but LSU got steamrolled last week, so I finally said, you know what, I'll move Barkley ahead of Geis because Barkley fixed his pass protection, which was my big issue with him on tape, and he has just been dominating on tape as a runner.
Yeah, and I saw Trace McSorley last year. I was actually scouting someone else, and I'm like, this young quarterback has, he's a senior now, but he hadn't played before last year.
This year, and he's a senior next year. So McSorley.
No, it says on ESPN he's a senior this year. But
really?
but I mean, he has really come up, and this year 10 touchdowns, 3 interceptions, 1,037 yards. I mean, he's the lowest he's passed is 64.6%, I believe, on the year in a game. I think no, it's 53.6. He had 153. He had a 64.6, a 78.3, and a 72. So he's passing at a high percentage. He's throwing 1, 2, 3, and 4 touchdown games. He's running the ball extremely well. I mean, McSorley, he has some things to work on, but he's one of those players that don't count him out. Don't count him out and put him together with Barkley, and that Penn State team is rolling at the moment.
Yeah, NFLDraftScout.com, the site that Dane Brugler writes, has Trace McSorley as a 2019 prospect. So I think he's a junior redshirt on Penn State's bio site, but ESPN has him listed as a true senior.
Okay, I got you.
But yeah,
I hopefully
with Jacob Eason, Francois both injured, that creates some controversy for 2019. But I'm looking at Justin Herbert and out of Oregon and Trace McSorley as probably the 2 guys who've capitalized the most off of those injuries to Eason and Francois.
And I hope he comes back because I think he's got a heck of a future in front of him if he spends one more year in college. Moving on, we have USC beating Cal. This was a game where I know I got into Josh Rosen a little bit on Sunday, but I'm going to get
You got into Darnold on Sunday's podcast.
Well, yeah, but I want to get into it a little bit on here. Pass rush had Darnold. They had Darnold spooked. They were able to get a pass rush on him. He was not able to do anything early with that pass rush. California played excellent defense, and then in the last couple minutes, UCLA really pulled away from them in the last quarter or so. What was it? Quarter and a half, something like that. And Cal, in a lot of ways, really outplayed USC, but USC won the game, and they will probably move on. They'll probably at least stay at number 5 until they lose, maybe even move up at some point there.
Yeah, Mary Kay Cabot wrote an article saying that if the Browns get the number 1 pick in the draft, someone like Sam Darnold or UCLA's Josh Rosen, could they be an option at quarterback? I don't think either one of those options would work. You'd ruin the team chemistry. We've talked about this before, but Mary Kay Cabot decided to bring it up if the Browns get one of those top 2 picks.
Yeah, I mean, it's this early, it's easy to speculate, but I think Kaiser is showing enough that I don't think that quarterback would be in the running there, because he is progressing. He is taking his lumps. He's taking a heck of a lot of lumps, but he is progressing, so I don't think that is an issue at the moment. Now, the next game on the docket is the first top 10 upset of the week here, and we have Oklahoma State, number 6, going in, losing to TCU 44-31. Mason Rudolph, as you talked about earlier, 398 yards, 2 touchdowns, but he was 22 of 41. I mean, ouch. Yeah, I didn't see the game, but
the accuracy and the trajectory was off on some of his throws in the Pitt game.
Yeah.
And it was the same with him against TCU. And I know Ryan loves Mason Rudolph to the point where he wants him to be in the top 5, but that's just not a realistic scenario after this game. I know Mayhem Clyde of Scouting College Football on Facebook raved about this TCU defense. TCU came out, they beat Cortland Sutton, and SMU last week limited Sutton to 1 reception for 0 yards. They come out, they limit what Mason Rudolph can do, and Rudolph throws some interceptions, just has a bad game, a lot of inconsistent throws where the trajectory is off, and sometimes you've got to adapt your scouting reports. If you see something on tape and you see it consistently enough to the point where you notice it's a flaw or something the quarterback needs to work on. And that's one of the things that you got to learn as a scout. You can't just go by with what you see in 1 or 2 games on tape that wowed you from last year. It's a process, and this is the thing with Mason. There's things he's going to have to work on.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I had to learn coming from coaching to watching tape all year round, was that where a coach is going to look at what they want now, they don't have all the games under their belt the way that you would have as a scout. So you might not get the whole picture. You may fall in love with somebody and they just don't get it they may not have it long term like you were expecting as a coach.
I know there's different comps. Like, all 3 of our writers have scouted Mason Rudolph. I know Ryan's comp for him is Aaron Rodgers. My comp for him was Joe Flacco of the Ravens, and I think Mark Suba's comp for him was Tony Romo. Which of those 3 comps would you say is probably the most accurate, just from seeing limited samples of Rudolph.
Which ones?
Aaron Rodgers, Joe Flacco, and Tony Romo.
I would say out of the three of them, maybe size and everything, maybe Tony Romo, all things considered.
Yeah, it's too early. We still need to see a few more games of tape from Mason, but
yeah, but at the same time, that was a tough comparison because I don't think any of them are 100% accurate. But moving on, next we have the Washington Huskies at number 7 versus the Colorado Buffalo. Washington won 37-10, and the big story here was running back Myles Gaskin, 27 carries, 202 yards, 2 touchdowns for Washington. Jake Browning had 11 for 21, 160 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception.
Third-round grade on Myles Gaskin. I really like this running back. Even though he's a little bit undersized, he's been very consistent. He's had 1,000 yards in each of his first 2 seasons, despite being 5'10", and he is one of those players that bails Jake Browning out, just like Trey Adams at left tackle and Coleman Shelton at center. He's another guy that just bails out this team, and he had a big game and showed it. He showed he can ball out.
Yeah, he really did, and I'm getting lower on Jake Browning by the week. He has got to start picking it up, or else he's going to be in trouble.
I have I think I have a early to mid-second round grade on him. I know Charlie Campbell had a 4th to 6th round grade on him and a 3rd to 5th on Baker Mayfield, which I feel is a little bit too harsh at this point. But at the same time, I can understand why. There's some people that say Mayfield is just a pure college QB. So we'll let it play out. And we won't. Everyone has their own opinions on players, so we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and moving to the next game, Michigan beat Purdue 28-10. Purdue just kicked itself in the crotch so much. It's like, they had chances to catch up. They had chances to win. They had chances to get there, and they blew it each and every single time. So Michigan deserved that win simply because Purdue they didn't want it.
Yeah. That's true. Purdue just didn't show as much heart or as much fire as Michigan. I really don't have much to say about this game. I just like the receiver on Michigan, the true freshman, Donovan Peoples-Jones. That's the best name I've heard for a prospect in a while. And it's like on Key and Peele when they had the receiver named Hingle McCringleberry. That's what I think of when I think of Donovan Peoples-Jones, the true freshman receiver for Michigan.
Yeah, and
he was a 5-star recruit, so he'll probably be a 2020 draft pick in the first round if he keeps getting these 100-yard games as a true freshman.
Yeah, it's like he's just another one of those guys we're going to keep an eye on for the future in the draft. And moving on,
and we have a high school page with all the top seniors in high school, so if those guys get starting jobs as true freshmen in college, they'll be on our radar as well. So that helps us stay up to date with future players as well. So moving on.
Yeah, moving on, we're going number 10, Ohio State. Put a hurting on UNLV, 54-21, with Dwayne Haskins going 15 for 23, 228 yards and 2 touchdowns for Ohio State, and J.K. Dobbins of Ohio State going 14 carries for 95 yards, and Paris Campbell 3 receptions, 105 yards and a touchdown, as Ohio State just steamrolled that game. Next game up is Georgia plowing number 17 Mississippi State. I mean, it was tough to watch. 31-3 as number 11 Georgia beat Mississippi State. Jake Fromm, University of Georgia, 9 of 12, 201 yards, 2 touchdowns. Nick Chubb, 15 carries, 81 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was that was a tough one to watch. Then we have number 12 Florida State losing to NC State 27-21.
I watched this game. Chubb was on fire, and this was Florida State's first 0-2 start since 1989. They lost to Brett Favre in Southern Mississippi back in 1989 to start the year 0-2. So this is their first 0-2 start since 1989.
Yeah, and so that one was a little bit shocking because I expected Florida State to come out with a lot more fire than they did. Next one is they came in and they absolutely destroyed Old Dominion. Number 13, Virginia Tech destroyed Old Dominion 38-0.
I'd just like to mention that the dean of Old Dominion that used to date my mother, the guy who used to date my mother at Old Dominion, he's now the dean of the school. So, sorry.
Yeah, well, I mean, okay, I'm not going to make any comments there.
I apologize to him for the butt whooping Virginia Tech gave his school. I'm just going to leave.
It's like the start of redneck games. It's like, greetings, y'all. We welcome you and apologize for the butt whooping you were about to receive. Jeff Foxworthy's greatest voice. But that's pretty much what happened. And you apologize to the dean. I apologize that you didn't get the dean's hair. Because let's face it, man, it's like you got the fro going. I mean, you would have been a hit back in the 70s.
Yeah, but this guy dated my mom in the early 80s, like way back when, before she met me.
So that was way before you ever thought of. It's like, unless she was thinking of you as a teenager and you just happened to come up the exact same way she envisioned.
Well, she had curly hair in the 70s too, but it wasn't like an afro like my hair is.
You're really going back now. I mean, geez. Like, I didn't expect to go back that far. I'm sorry.
My dad was born in 1949.
I'm going to apologize right now to Chris's mother because we know how you women like to protect your age a little bit. Chris is just being really insensitive right now.
Well, my dad was born in 1949. My mom was born in 1956, and I was born in 1991. There's a huge age gap in my family.
Obviously. And you're still not supposed to go that far. I mean, that was just really, really bad. You better get her a very good Mother's Day present. I mean, you better get her gold bars.
It was the best birthday present she got. I was born on her 35th birthday, so I was the best birthday present she got.
She might be rethinking that being the best birthday gift after you made that one public. Okay, moving on. Once again, sorry, Mom. The Miami Hurricanes beat Toledo. Oh, that is, with this hurricane season, that is just terrible, terrible, terrible. 52-30. Miami, the U, let's call them the U for this week. The U beat Toledo 52-30 with Mark Walton of the U getting 11 carries, 204 yards, and a touchdown, leading Miami past Toledo. Next up, we have Auburn destroying Missouri 51-14 behind Jarrett Stidham for 13-17, 218 yards, and Cam Martin, 9 carries, 74 yards. Next up, Washington State beat Nevada 45-7 with Luke Falk going 36 of 47 and an absolute monster of a game with 478 yards and 5 touchdowns. Next, we have Louisville destroying Kent State. Number 19, Louisville destroying Kent State 42-3. Lamar Jackson, 18 of 22, 299 yards, 2 touchdowns in his first big game since coming back in this year. he really showed why a lot of people have him as the number 1 quarterback. Number 20.
He also struggled against Clemson last week.
Oh, he struggled mightily. Florida, in possibly the last win they have this year, if these charges go through for all their players, beat Kentucky 28-27 behind Malik Davis, 21 carries, 93 yards, and Tyree Cleveland, 4 receptions, 110 yards, 1 touchdown. San Diego State beat Air Force. Number 22, San Diego State beat Air Force with Rashad Penny getting 20 carries, 128 yards, and 3 touchdowns. Number 24, Oregon beat lost to Arizona State 37-35. So Arizona State pulls the upset over Oregon on the back of quarterback Manny Wilkins, who went 24 for 39, 347 yards, and a touchdown. And finally, LSU, number 25, beat Syracuse 35-26 with behind the aerial attack of Eric Dungy, 32 of 53, 265 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah, so basically the top 5 remain the same. Washington's at 6. Georgia's moved up to number 7. TCU is now number 9. Michigan's at 8. Wisconsin is at 10. Next week we get Clemson versus Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And we also get USC versus Washington State on Friday night in Washington State. Number 5 versus number 15. Luke Falk versus Sam Darnold.
Yeah, and the FPI top 10, the top 5 here are Alabama, Ohio State, Oklahoma, Clemson, and Washington 1 through 5.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on in college football right now. And NC State could be a surprise team in the ACC. Remember, NC State came with a dropped interception and a made field goal attempt from beating both Clemson and Florida State to make the ACC championship last year. And they beat Florida State this year in Tallahassee for the first time since 2005. So NC State's a team to keep an eye on. Oklahoma dropped in the rankings. Miami, the U, they're at 14. So San Diego State, South Florida, there's some teams that haven't lost yet. But this is going to be a really interesting week. It's going to reveal a lot. And I'm looking at a few games because a lot of the teams like Bama, Oklahoma, Penn State, they play weaker opponents this week. I'm looking at USC and I'm looking at Clemson's game against Virginia Tech and USC and Washington State. Those are the 2 big must-see games. And it's going to be interesting to see how those teams perform this week.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read some news off real quick to end the show. We're running a little long. It was a heck of a week in football. So we thank everybody here who has stuck with us so far to this point, and anybody who sticks ahead for the news to come. Baylor coach Matt Rule said on K-State, my kind of football team, if I could think of what I want a football team to look like, it would be them. And that's coming from ESPN staff writer Jake Trotter. Dan Murphy, ESPN staff writer, said Michigan quarterback Wilton Spate won't be able to play this week if the Wolverines weren't on a bye week. Jim Harbaugh said the play that caused the injury was egregious. His status going forward is uncertain for now. Then we have Iowa State coach Matt Campbell on the advantage of Jack Trice Stadium, especially on midweek night games. One of the things that makes Iowa State special is the fan base. The fan base is electric. Then Texas coach Tom Herman on the premise of taking Iowa State lightly. There's a lot of guys here who were there for the 24-0 in Ames 2 years ago. There will be zero taking of Iowa State lightly. And Chris, I think you're echoing in the background.
Well, Iowa State has a Iowa State's Matt Campbell is one of the more underrated coaches. I know the person who talked about TCU football talked about how Matt Campbell's building something last year in our Scouting College Football thread. So the name's familiar, the players are familiar, and they've got a prospect in Alan Lazard at wide receiver number 5, who a lot of people really like, 6'5", 223, will probably be in the Senior Bowl.
Yeah, and here is a piece of news from coming out of Alabama as reported by Alex Scarborough, ESPN staff writer. In the wake of NFL protests over the weekend, Nick Saban said that he isn't in favor of censorship of players. He said, "It's painful to see a lack of unity now, but respects everyone's rights to express their beliefs. Most good things come out of love, respect, and compassion for unifying people. And most bad things come out of hate, dislike, and deceit. Hopefully, we can focus on the above and not the below." So, we are going to end the show on that high note and say, if you stuck with us, thank you. We surely appreciate it. If you have any issues, please put them below. If you liked us, please comment below as well. Like, share, and subscribe to the Evolution Network. Will be greatly appreciative. And for everybody here, for Andrew Kermish, he will be back at some point with his injury. And we thank you.
Well, he couldn't come on today because of his voice, but when he's back, his voice will be more persuasive than Morgan Freeman's. That we can guarantee you.
Yes, it will. And we say have fun, nice day, and take care of yourselves.